I think that everyone is misreading the dynamic between Joe Manchin and Joe Biden, the two Joes. I think that folks are misreading the power dynamic between the White House and the senator from the great state of West Virginia. And I want to explain. I may be wrong, but I'm at least firm in my conviction. I was on last night with Chris Cuomo, and as usual, the way that this works, ahead of time, they ask me, first of all, are you available? Yes, I'm available. Would you like to come on with Chris? Of course, I'd like to come on with Chris. And then they give me an indication as to what we will be discussing on the program, namely last night, Manchin and the Virginia election. I'm looking at the notes that were supplied to me by a producer. It's go time for the Build Back Better plan in Virginia. How will both resolve, and what does it mean for Dems? Biden's lagging in the polls. What is Manchin doing? Is this going to hurt McAuliffe? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I never really got to say last night what I wanted to say about Virginia, which is this, that unless you live in Virginia, it hardly matters who wins, meaning the model has now been established by Glenn Youngkin of how a Republican running statewide in a non-red state can effectively run by winning the Trump base and yet keeping Trump at arm's length. If the polls are accurate, Virginia is going to be within the margin of error. I can't see McAuliffe defying the polls with a big win. I can see Youngkin, with the wind at his sails, winning by more than the margin of error. But let's say that the election is decided, as the pollsters suggest, within the margin of error in a state won by Joe Biden last year by 10 points. How do you read that as anything other than a big GOP victory? And it's the last big election headed into the midterm elections. And of course, the historical model for the midterm elections suggests that Democrats, as the party in control of the White House, will lose 26 or so seats. It could be far shy of that, and they still will lose control of the House of Representatives. So it's a GOP victory, even if it's McAuliffe by a whisker, unless you live in Virginia, and then you've got to live with the result. You'll see it different than I just identified. Okay, with regard to Manchin, so I was on the C block of Cuomo prime time last night. It means that I sat there, with things like this in my ear and listened to what was being said earlier on in the program for the A and the B blocks. And very much like the national narrative, what I was hearing was focused on Manchin having just created a stumbling block for the White House by saying he is not going to go along with the $1.75 trillion spending package. This, of course, the accompaniment to the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed the Senate with the support of 19 Republicans, including Mitch McConnell. And the more that I listened and the more that I thought, the more a counter narrative took hold with me, which I said to Chris. Actually, I don't know that he appreciated it. We have sort of a give and take that we like to do together. And I said to him as I began my comments, I don't think that you're connecting the dots. And he said to me, that's what you always tell me. What I said is the conventional wisdom is that Joe Manchin is a burr in the saddle of the White House. Joe Manchin is the only thing stopping Joe Biden from achieving the largest expansion of the societal safety net in 60 years. Joe Manchin is an obstructionist. He's the Democrats' own worst enemy. That's the narrative that was taking hold. Oh, and by the way, to hear one member of Congress say it, he's also now anti-black. One aspect of the Manchin story yesterday and last night reminds me of the conversation that we had here yesterday pertaining to John McWhorter. John McWhorter, the linguist who contributes from Columbia, who contributes to the New York Times and kind of warns progressives that their anti-racist crusade has become a religion and might not be in their best interest. Why do I bring this up? Because Representative Cori Bush said Joe Manchin's opposition to the Build Back Better Act is anti-black, Anti-child, anti-woman, anti-immigrant. Joe Manchin does not get to dictate the future of our country. He might as well just have said Joe Manchin is racist for thus far opposing passage of the Build Back Better plan. All this because of a presser that Manchin held yesterday. The coverage from the Washington Post says Senator Joe Manchin on Monday called on Democrats to slow down in their work to advance a $1.75 trillion plan to overhaul the country's healthcare, education, climate, and tax laws, raising new doubts about the party's timeline to advance a critical piece of President Joe Biden's economic agenda as soon as this week. Here, in part, is what Senator Manchin said yesterday.
For the sake of the country, I urge the House to vote and pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Holding this bill hostage is not going to work in getting my support for a reconciliation bill. Throughout the last 3 months, I've been straightforward about my concerns that I will not support a reconciliation package that expands social programs and irresponsibly adds to our $29 trillion in national debt that no one seems to really care about or even talk about. Nor will I support a package that risks hurting American families suffering from historic inflation. Simply put, I will not support a bill that is this consequential without thoroughly understanding the impact that it'll have on our national debt, our economy, and most importantly, all of our American people. Every elected representative needs to know what they are voting for and the impact it has, not only on their constituents, but the entire country.
Again, from Democrats, what do you hear? Especially the progressives. You hear, oh, my God, how could he be such an obstructionist? How could he be so bad for the White House? How could he be so problematic for Joe Biden? To which I said to Chris Cuomo last night and say to all of you in a more expansive form today, Joe Manchin perhaps just did Joe Biden a big solid. If Joe Manchin didn't exist, Joe Biden would have to invent him, because he's provided a one-man, a one-person bulwark against further erosion of whatever support the president has remaining. And why do I say this? A couple of data-driven reasons. First, NBC News survey that came out on Sunday, Chuck Todd announced it on Meet the Press, 71% of Americans say the nation is headed in the wrong direction. That is NBC News. A new ABC survey, a plurality, 32% say this spending bill, however much it may end up being, would hurt them. 32%, a plurality, say it'll hurt me. And then there's a new NPR survey that says 44% of Democrats, they don't want Joe Biden to be their nominee in 2024. Here's additional detail from NBC. I'm just going to cherry pick some of the findings. A majority of Americans now disapprove of President Joe Biden's job performance, while half give him low marks for competence and uniting the country, according to the latest NBC News poll. What's more, the survey finds that 7 in 10 adults, including almost half of Democrats, that's significant, I think it's 48%, believe the nation is headed in the wrong direction, as nearly 60% who view Biden's stewardship on the economy negatively were only 9 months into his presidency. So he's underwater. Only 42% of adults say they approve of his overall job. That's compared to 54% who say they disapprove of the president's job, which is up 6 points from August. Guess who that puts him in a comparison with? Yeah, Donald Trump. At this stage of Trump's presidency, using Gallup's historical data, Biden's approval rating in this poll, 42%, is lower than any other modern first-year president at a similar point in time, with the key exception of Donald Trump, whose approval averaged 37% in the fall of 2017. Donald Trump never got above water. In all 4 years, he never got above water. Okay, so that's NBC. NBC saying 70% of the country think we're headed in the wrong direction. ABC Ipsos conducted recently found that a plurality, 32% of Americans, think the bills, the big spending bills, would hurt people like them if they become law. Only 25%, 1 out of 4, think it would help them. They've done a terrible job in selling this. And by the way, it's not the media's fault. I know that Bernie and others like to say, oh, the media only focuses on the bottom line. How could the media not focus on the bottom line when the negotiation hasn't been about whether this stays or this goes, but rather how much are we willing to spend? So that's ABC. Then there's NPR. Looking ahead to 2024, 36% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents say their party will have a better chance winning the White House with Biden at the top of the ticket. Let me say it slowly. 36% say Biden at the top of the ticket gives us a better chance of winning. 44% want somebody else. Okay, for comparison, how does that stack up against the Republicans? 44% of Ds want someone other than Biden. In contrast, ask the same question about Trump. 50% of Republicans and GOP-leaning independents say Trump on the top of the ticket gives them the best chance of recovering the presidency. Said more simply, a higher percentage of Republicans want Trump as their nominee than Democrats who want the incumbent president as their nominee. And I should also point something else, having read this at Axios, that Manchin is not spitballing. A lot of the criticism that I've heard of Manchin is criticism that says, he's for no reason other than trying to curry favor with his very red-leaning state is Joe Manchin obstructing the $1.75 trillion spending bill. This is very, very important, and it comes from Axios. Manchin's surprise press statement didn't just disrupt the glide path to a vote envisioned by House leaders. It created a PR nightmare for the White House. He said the $1.75 trillion package was financed by shell games, and he said that the cost is actually closer to $3.9 trillion. Well, wait a minute. Where does he get that? That estimate comes from the Penn-Wharton budget model, which has been helping Manchin sort through how much each program costs. And if you take the time to go to Axios, they've embedded easily digestible tables provided by Penn-Wharton, okay, a very reputable financial source that show the costs per year and over the usual 10-year window. So it's not $1.75 trillion, it's actually double that. The same experts estimated last week that the revenue increases that Biden proposes to finance the spending, which the White House puts at $1.9 trillion. Did I say billion? If I ever said billion, I meant trillion. The same experts estimated last week that the revenue increases Biden proposes to financing the spending, which the White House put at $1.9 trillion, may only generate closer to $1.5 trillion. So Joe Manchin has been consulting the Penn-Wharton experts throughout this process. It is them on which he's relying when he says it's going to cost much more than we're being told, and it's not going to raise as much as we are being told. As I have said, this entire process seems very rushed, very subjected to waste in the end, because they really don't even know what they're supporting. They just know they want to spend X amount of dollars. Then they turn around and they say, oh, it's the media that is presenting this more as a financial matter than a societal safety net. It's been driven by the financial negotiation. How else can it be presented? And one other thing, it all makes me wonder, what happened to the historic economic framework? Weren't those the words? Historic economic framework. That's what President Biden said last Thursday as he was departing for Rome. Remember what happened? He went to Capitol Hill. He met behind closed doors with his caucus, went back to the White House and announced we have a historic economic framework. And there was speculation that by the time his plane landed in Rome, there might be a vote on the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. And now we know that's just not the case. He announced that with great fanfare from the East Room. So what am I saying? I hope I'm being very straightforward and simplistic. I am advancing the argument that Joe Manchin is not an obstructionist, a problem, a burr in the saddle of Joe Biden. Instead, in view of Biden's declining numbers, Manchin is exactly what the doctor ordered, because Manchin is now seemingly forcing progressives and moderates, Democrats, to take the win, to give the win of $1.2 trillion in infrastructure spending to Joe Biden. It's Manchin who is doing the White House's dirty work in bringing Democrats together to vote on a $1.2 trillion package because, for whatever reason, poor salesmanship, the merit of it, but for whatever reason, America is not on board with the direction of the Biden White House, as evidenced by those 3 different polls that I gave you. NBC, ABC, NPR. Not exactly Rasmussen. Not exactly Fox News surveys. Right? These reputable pollsters are saying the same thing, which is America just doesn't have a gut feel that's positive 9-10 months into the Biden White House. And so it is Joe Manchin to the rescue to say, hey, let's take the win. Let's stop fighting about things that the country's not convinced are in its best interest. We'll fight that another day. Let's take the win for $1.2 trillion. That's what I think is really going on here.